This video is over lesson 2.3 in your Unit 2 packet. Title of the lesson is Solve Absolute Value Equations. Absolute value is just the distance that a number is away from zero. Because it is a distance, absolute value must be positive. I want you to think about the scenario. Absolute value of x equals 7, like you see on example 1a. That means for what number is x 7 units away from 0? Well, if you really think about it, there's two numbers that make that a true statement. On a number line, the number 7 is 7 units away from 0, and so is the number -7. Which brings us to our method for solving absolute value equations. When solving, first we want to set up two equations. We want to take what's inside the absolute value and set it equal to the thing on the other side of the equal sign. But because of the rule we just discussed, we also want to set it equal to the opposite of the thing on the outside of the equal sign. Now here, x is already by itself in both of these, so we don't have to solve anything. To check it, we would just plug it back in. So to do that, we're going to take the numbers that we found and plug it back into the original equation. So we're looking at the absolute value of 7. Does that equal 7? And does the absolute value of -7 equal 7? So is 7 7 units from 0? Yes. Is -7 7 units from 0? Yes. Both of those answers are correct. When you're taking the absolute value of a number, remember if you take the absolute value of -5, your answer is 5 because -5 is 5 units from 0. The absolute value of 0 is 0 because 0 is 0 units from 0, so on and so forth. Okay, so we're going to use the same method on example 1b. So we're going to take what's inside the absolute value and set it equal to what's outside, and what's inside equal to the opposite of what is outside. And then we're going to solve both equations. So to do that, we're going to add 3. We end up with the answers 11 and -5. So now to plug that back in, we would have 11 minus 3. We want to know, does that equal 8? And -5 minus 3. Does that equal 8? Okay, so 11 minus 3 is 8. Does the absolute value of 8 equal 8? Yes. And does the absolute value of -8 equal 8? Yes. So both of these work. Okay, so take a look at C. C is a little bit different because there's a lot of stuff outside the absolute value. The very first thing you have to do when solving one of these equations is get the absolute value part by itself. So we're looking at solving for this guy right here. That means we have 3 times the absolute value minus 5 equals 4. So we have to undo that 3 and that -5. Now think back to lesson 2, what I told you for figuring out what to do first. Let's read this statement. 3 times the absolute value minus 5. So we're going to undo that -5 first. And the inverse operation is addition. So we're going to rewrite this statement exactly how we see it, except for those 5's cancel out. And we have to add the 4 plus 5. Now we need to undo this 3. You may be tempted to just distribute that 3, but in this case we don't want to do that. We just want to undo it. It's being multiplied, so we're going to divide both sides by 3. That cancels, and we're left the absolute value of 2x minus 7 equals 3. Now we can solve it just like we've been practicing. Take what's inside and set it equal to what's outside. Take what's inside and set it equal to the opposite of what's outside and solve. So first we'll add 7 to both sides, rewrite, and then divide by 2 and rewrite. Add 7, divide. All right, so there's our two answers. So we're going to plug both of those in and just make sure that they work. So I'm just plugging this into the original equation. I'm going to make my absolute value bars a little thicker just so we can see them. So remember, we're going to do what's inside first. We have 2 times 5, which is 10, minus 7, which is 3. The absolute value of 3 times 3 minus 5. Absolute value of 3 is 3, times 3 is 9, minus 5. That does equal 4. Should have put question marks there. So this one works. We're going to do the exact same thing for that second one. Everywhere I see an X, I'm plugging in a 2. All right, so then this would be 4 minus 7, which is negative 3, which is positive 3 when we take the absolute value. So 3 times 3 is 9, minus 5, that does equal 4, so we're good. So this also works. All right, let's take a look at this last question. Absolute value of x equals negative 10. Absolute value is a distance, which means that the answer cannot be negative, which means if you have something like this, the solution is no solution because no number that you plug in there will come out with an absolute value of negative 10. E is very similar to an example we just did. We have to get this part by itself first. So we have to undo that plus 5. The opposite of adding is subtracting, so we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. Once again, we end up with an absolute value equals a negative number, which means that we're going to have a no solution because you can't have a negative absolute value.